Perhaps you've heard that phrase that offers a quick and simple fix to a complex situation. Finding the magic bullet. A variation to this would be finding the silver bullet. These phrases have been part of our cultural conversation for generations now, as a reference to a direct and effortless solution to a problem. The word picture describes the belief that if you can only find the magic bullet, then the problem will go away. In relationships, finances, work, health, business, and so on. And in our society, we're familiar with a couple of reference points for this word picture, so it didn't come out of nowhere. In the legends of the chimera-like creatures, the silver bullet was believed to be the only weapon against a werewolf or other beings of the underworld. And in popular adventures of the Lone Ranger, this one man would arrive in the midst of trouble, save the day, and leave only a silver bullet behind as a calling card. While no one would ever know the identity of this masked man, it was clear that he alone could take care of wickedness and injustice like no one else could. The werewolf and the Lone Ranger are relatively newer concepts as far as our culture goes, but the belief between silver and magical powers goes back far into ancient mythology and pagan religions. Now, if we're honest, we have wanted to find such an artifact as a way out of a terrible situation. Unfortunately, whatever the problem is and whatever area of life is affected, what works on one occasion will not work the next time around. There is no magic bullet. And even though we know that, it doesn't stop us from hoping to find one when we face an issue we can't solve. Now, as we come to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, we will look again at this common frustration. But we need to approach that frustration in light of last Sunday's teaching, the sovereignty of God. We can search for, but cannot fathom the ways or plans of God any more than we can find a single, sure solution to some problem we encounter. And a key reason is that we exist in this place between God's sovereignty and our human limitation. Now that the subject has been highlighted for us in chapter 6, we will see it come into play throughout the rest of Ecclesiastes. And as a reminder of this, these kinds of phrases will show up just in the next few verses alone. You do not know. You cannot find, you cannot discover everything about God's ways and his activities. God is above and comprehends all things. I am a limited creature. It is what it is. But how I respond to all of this is characterized as either wise or foolish. So the other theme that comes into play a lot more prominently now is this one, wisdom and folly. Since Ecclesiastes is an example of Old Testament wisdom literature, this is a theme we should expect. But let me take a moment to clarify how wisdom and foolishness are defined and demonstrated in the Word of God. It isn't simply a contrast between someone with knowledge and someone who's ignorant. That is part of it. And that's probably the part that we sort of by default go to in our own American culture when we hear these words. Yet scripturally, these two have to do with character and ethics. Being upright, having integrity, and living righteously are all correlated to a life of wisdom. The one who is wise is the one who wants to know the mind of God and the heart of God and employ that information in living for him. The fool not only expresses little or no interest in spiritual truth, but he's focused on his own interests, even above the interests of those he claims to love. So the words associated with the fool include wickedness and evil. Consistently, the scriptures admonish us to pursue the one and avoid the other. And today, we will see the comparison clearly marked by this phrase that also repeats, better than. While we'll cover a fair amount of territory in a short time, we'll really only be looking at a couple of life areas where the application of wisdom needs to be made. The first is the aspect of adversity and prosperity. Now, I assume that each of us have experienced both at some points in our lives. And yet our responses reveal which of the two paths we're pursuing. So come with me to chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, since that is the end of all mankind, and the living should take it to heart. Grief is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be glad. The heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in a house of pleasure. The first better than comparison is between reputation and death on the one side, and fine perfume and birth on the other. Now, if it's been a little while since you've looked at Hebrew poetry, here is the pattern that you need to recognize when you read it in the individual verses. Hebrew parallelism is where the first line introduces a particular subject. The second line then repeats it, expands it, or draws additional parallels, like this. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. Now, perfumes were not, as they are today, available at every corner drugstore. They were rare, precious, and used for special occasions, often to express joy, like at the birth of a newborn. And having read this verse, we could probably agree that your reputation does have great value, but death, how is that connected? Well, a newborn starts off with tremendous potential, but also with great uncertainty. At the start of life, there is no guarantee that that child will live his life in wisdom instead of folly. But at death, your life cannot be corrupted anymore. And your reputation is fixed at that point. So the day of one's death is better, having obtained a good name by the time you take your last breath. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, since that is the end of all mankind, and the living should take it to heart. Let's start with the nice part, the place of feasting. What happens in those settings? Good food, good drink, laughter, exchanging gifts, being with people that you care about, family and friends. They are the very things that we've been told 3 times so far in Ecclesiastes to recognize as gifts from God. So this is not a contradiction of that teaching. It is an evaluation of what is better in light of the shortness of this life. The celebrations and the feasts are only temporary. And in many cases, those who continually throw parties do so to escape the unpleasant parts of life. Now let's go to the nice, not so nice part. What happens at a funeral? Everyone there is confronted with their own mortality. It is the end of every person, no exceptions. Having to face death is something that should force us to reevaluate life, work, family, priorities, and mostly our souls. So grief is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be glad. The heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in a house of pleasure. Now remember, when you hear these things about laughter, what we've already covered in the larger concepts in the first 7 chapters of Ecclesiastes. Laughter has been equated with folly. Laughter is a temporary break in the routine of life, which is fine, but it doesn't last any more than continual partying lasts. At least the grief is real in comparison, and that grief can serve to bring someone to self-examination so that changes are made going forward. It would not be the first time that a fool faces the death of someone he or she cares about, and that death becomes the starting point of a journey towards acquiring wisdom and ultimately coming to know Christ. You know, I only had one Christian friend that ever quoted this verse to me, and more than once in our time together. And it was always in the context of somebody else's death that we heard about. The reason my friend quoted it was to remind us both of the purpose that the teacher is highlighting here, to get real. It's obvious that going to a funeral is not a party. And even though we often smile or laugh at the memories we share of the person that just died, it's not like a wedding or a birthday. And grief is better than laughter because of what it can do. At the casket, the wise person will look at life more seriously. I would use the term soberly, thoughtfully, clear-minded. And in the long term, your heart will be better for it, or glad, as verse 3 says. When I conduct a funeral, I believe, and have for years, that I have an obligation to apply Ecclesiastes 7 by addressing death head on and not sugarcoating it. And so as the service begins, I specifically mention, it's become a pattern now for me. Viewings, funerals, and memorial services force us to face the issues of God, eternity, despair, or hope. As a result, and I've done 40 funerals now, that's longer than I've been in ministry for the number of years, you will not hear me use common phrases like gone to a better place or passed away. Death is a real reminder of the destiny of each one of us. It offers clarity. And it can serve as a motivation not to waste the life that we've been given. It is at the viewing that we are brought to the place where we remember, wait a minute, this is the only go-round I have. I better make this life worth something. So if we face the truth concerning where we are all headed, then we will find value in pursuing a life of wisdom. The heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in a house of pleasure. You see, the fool avoids the harshness of life and reality of death by looking to find distraction at endless celebrations, entertainment options, and parties. The wise one sees life as it is and is willing to face it as such. It is a better way. Here's something else that's better. Verse 5. It is better to listen to the rebuke from a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. For like the crackling of burning thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This too is futile. Verse 5 is not referring to someone being nasty or trying to humiliate you. It is the direction given by a person of wisdom who can see the blind spots you're not seeing in yourself. Like death, a rebuke is not pleasant either, but it is better because it forces us to deal with the reality of our limitations. And the rebuke doesn't even have to be a correction of some problem. It can be a challenge to take some aspect of your world more seriously and alter your life course. For the believer, the rebuke is supposed to draw us to recognize the gap between the character of Christ and where I am with my attitude or action. It is better because that kind of rebuke offers something of substance. The laughter of fools does not. That laughter is noise, like thorns popping in a fire and disappearing forever, while a rebuke can have a lasting impact. How many of you recall a moment in time when someone who really cared about you took the time to point out an area of your life that needed attention? Not only do you remember the conversation, but now you testify how your life turned a corner just a little bit, and you're on a better path because of it. The brevity of life is one form of adversity that we encounter which tests our character. Difficult financial times are another one, and we understand that. When things get tough, we face many other temptations to find a magic bullet without success. Beginning of verse 7. Surely oppression turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe destroys the heart. The end of the matter is better than its beginning. A patient spirit is better than a proud spirit. Don't let your spirit rush to be angry, for anger abides in the heart of fools. Don't say, why were the former days better than these, since it is not wise of you to ask this. Adversity pushes us to reveal who we really are inside. Hard times can bring down the wise man, whose wisdom enabled him to be as successful as he was. However, in the hard times, he is more willing to find a shortcut to hold on to those things that he's accumulated. But in doing so, he becomes foolish as he surrenders control of his life to the one extorting him. Hard times tempt us to become more foolish, which is characterized in these verses as impatient, arrogant, critical, and attracted to fantasy rather than reality. And I love verse 10, the good old days. We remember the past through a prismed lens. From the good times, we remember the good stuff. And then we paint a picture of the past as if it were made up of mostly rainbows and unicorns. But was it really? Of course, there were great times back then. There are great times right now. There were also terrible times back then. And there are terrible times right now. And as only Warren Wiersbe can describe things, it has been said that the good old days are the combination of a bad memory and a good imagination. And often this is true. I expect that many of us do get nostalgic when life becomes difficult. I do. Having good memories of the past and enjoying them is also a good thing. But the unhealthy longing for the good old days is actually a rejection of reality. In comparison, wisdom offers us an accurate assessment of the larger picture. Don't say, were the former days better than these, since it's not wise of you to ask this. Any society, any culture, any nation can and will experience an extended time of good and bad, glory and collapse. But if you expand your measurement from a decade or two of the good times to a generation or more, there's still nothing new under the sun. In the 1920s, America enjoyed great prosperity. So those who entered the Great Depression of the 1930s could look back on them with great fondness. They called them the Roaring Twenties. And yet did the harshness of the 1930s become the good old days when tens of thousands of our young men were being killed in the Pacific and in Europe during the 1940s? Remember, all of life is cyclical. And terrible financial times of the 1970s, if you lived through that, turned into great prosperity in the 80s and 90s. No matter what era of history you examine, whether prosperous or financially harsh, none of those days ever saw the end to theft, disease, extortion, rape, murder, and powerful people getting away with criminal activity. Verse 11. Wisdom, along with its inheritance, is good and an advantage to those who see the sun, because wisdom is protection, as money is protection. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. This is a classic example of an Old Testament proverb. The wealth you may accumulate is only good if you have the wisdom that corresponds with it. Otherwise, it cannot be seen properly for what it is, or it may become a source of idol worship. Both wisdom and wealth offer a level of protection against adversity. And as a general pattern, wisdom does lead to a longer life. The person who employs both wisdom and financial stewardship will be in a better position to live than the fool who employs neither one. Therefore, wisdom is better, and financial stability is better, but neither one can solve every problem. And if we've forgotten what we learned in the last few verses of chapter 6 last week, we're reminded once again of God's control and our limitations in verse 13. Consider the work of God, for who can straighten out what he has made crooked? This is a summary of verse 13. Go along with his plan. Don't try to or think you can alter it. The advice along these same lines continues. When times are good, be happy. When times are bad, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man cannot discover anything that will come after him. Now remember, we are able, because God has given us the capacity, to recognize patterns in the world. The opening chapter of Ecclesiastes describes them for us. There is a way of wisdom, there is a way of foolishness. Both Proverbs and Ecclesiastes describe them as well. And if we follow either path, then certain results will occur many times, but not every time, and that's the point. The teacher is addressing the belief that such patterns are fixed. like scientific formulas that can be used again and again with the exact same results. But that's not true. There is no silver bullet to make prosperity last and expand it even more. There's no silver bullet to fix the thing that bothers us when we face adversity. Instead, the wise person goes along with the ebb and flow of life as God unfolds it to him. And this verse serves as a reminder that our circumstances cannot determine our attitude or response to them. Now, in addition to adversity and prosperity, there's another aspect of life that makes us scratch our heads in seeking to understand how it all works. It's also addressed in the word pictures that I've been using. If there was something that you could do to guarantee your life that it will go a certain way, if you only have that formula or that artifact. You see, there is a belief promoted today, actually on a pretty large level, inside and outside of Christianity, that was also very much alive in Solomon's day. And this is basically it. God blesses the righteous with prosperity. God punishes the wickedness with adversity. And we've addressed this before, at least once in our study. And that is the ideal pattern. In the end, it will be true. But we're not at the end yet. And while we are here, we have a limited understanding of righteousness and wickedness. Verse 15, in my futile life, I've seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in spite of his righteousness. And there's a wicked man who lives long in spite of his evil. Don't be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It's good that you grasp the one and do not let the other slip from your hand. For the one who fears God will end up with both of them. These few verses have led to some discomfort for Christians because it sounds like the teacher is advocating a half-hearted obedience to the Lord. Don't be too righteous. On the other hand, it sounds like he's encouraging us to participate in a little bit of wickedness and foolishness every so often. But verse 18 is important when we read this. It's part of the whole, holding on to both of the imperatives and living in the fear of God. Once again, this is about dismantling the pursuit of the magic bullet. Those who have swallowed the idea that being righteous or acquiring wisdom and knowledge and insight will lead to prosperity are wrong and foolish. It is not a mathematical equation. The foolish is the one who believes it includes, or the foolish one is the one who believes, but that person we might call on one level a hypocrite. This is what it looks like. That's the phony who pursues external goodness, parades his generosity around for others to see, while he has no guarantee of obtaining riches for the efforts he makes to appear holy to other people. His end success is not any more promised than for the sincere person, the one who strives to be better, to deny her unhealthy desires, and she beats herself up when she sins. All that, God will be pleased with her efforts and reward her for her hard work at being good and moral. That was my life before I came to Christ. So on the other hand, or on the other side, this equation is wrong in addition to these. Since God does not punish wickedness as soon as it is committed, then sinning's fine. These few verses were written to rebuke all of those kinds of equations and beliefs. Don't be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? The point is that complete righteousness cannot be reached in this lifetime. And some foolishness cannot be avoided. Once again, we are imperfect and limited. And even though we are pursuing wisdom and pursuing righteousness are still better than the other options. The challenge from this is to recognize that we do fall. And when we do, we need to humbly bring ourselves back to God and confess and seek his forgiveness. Sin is not okay, and there's a solution for it. It's also recognizing that on this earth, I will never be as perfect as Christ is. And yet to model myself after him and to become like him is still my highest life goal. Pursuing righteousness must not be to show off on the one hand or to earn God's love on the other, but an expression of gratitude for what Christ has done. So it is good that you grasp the one and do not let the other slip from your hand, for the one who fears God will end up with both of these teachings. The balance between not being too righteous or too wicked is to live in light of God's final judgment. While the teacher could not know the timing of such event, and neither can we, he was confident that God would judge in his own time. So the fear of God motivates us to avoid foolishness and wickedness and to pursue wisdom and holiness. Verse 19. Wisdom makes the wise man stronger than 10 rulers of a city. There is certainly no righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. Now, at the beginning of the verse, we naturally think of strong leaders as having evidence of power and control. And yet wisdom is described as better than political power. And if you think about it, the strongest leaders are in place because there is a mind or minds behind the scenes thinking, gaining information, and strategizing to put that person in place or keep them there. At the same time, wisdom is not all-powerful. And so we're offered a direct summary of what we saw in the previous verses. There is no one who is righteous or never sins. And by way of example, once we accept the teaching of verse 20, we are offered a path for the wise person to walk. It has to do with gossip and criticism. Don't pay attention to everything people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know that many times you yourself have cursed others. You know what this is? It's another reality check. It is the fool who rejects the fact that we all say bad things about somebody else. But the wise person will recognize that that's true. What they say may not be fair, or it may be accurate. But either way, it forces you to live a certain way in light of the fact that we all do the same stuff. So the wise person, because of that, will practice the first part of verse 21. I'm going to let it go. The wise person will also be gracious when critical words are directed at him because he knows that he's guilty of the same thing in another context at another time. Now in verse 23, the teacher gives us a summary of his quest and admits something that we've heard before, but probably still find disappointing. For as beneficial as wisdom is, it has its limits. I've tested all this by wisdom. I resolved I will be wise, but it was beyond me. What exists is beyond reach and very deep. Who can discover it? I turned my thoughts to know, explore, and seek wisdom and an explanation for things, and to know that wickedness is stupidity and folly is madness. What he's done is stated accurately and very concisely what we've been looking at through this entire chapter, and it's a summary of the book once again. The one using wisdom to solve every problem in life will be frustrated because even the wisdom that can be obtained cannot offer an answer to every single problem or provide a full grasp of reality. However, wisdom does offer us an accurate picture of some parts of this life. And the next section helps us to intersect wisdom, righteousness, foolishness, and wickedness. Verse 26. And I find more bitter than death the woman who is a trap, her heart a net, and her hands chains. The one who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner will be captured by her. This is also another classic example of an Old Testament proverb. And this one happens to parallel the teachings of Proverbs chapter 5. In Proverbs 5, Solomon warns his sons to stay clear of the wicked and seductive woman. More than a few people can attest how their extramarital affair or rushing into a relationship later turned sour on them. And ever since, their troubles have multiplied without any clear way to escape. The teacher says it is a bitterness that has very few equals. And yet in his search for wisdom, he has found another bitter thing that probably won't sound very nice to 21st century ears. But hold on and hear him out. Look, says the teacher, I've discovered this by adding one thing to another to find out the explanation, which my soul continually searches for but does not find. What was that? Among 1,000 people I have found one true man, but among all these I have not found a true woman. Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they've sought out many schemes. Now we're going to deal with verse 28 in a little bit, but let's look at the thing that is so bitter. God made humans upright, righteous. That's both men and women. And yet they have gone after their own ways, their own devices, not his. They do not desire God's will for their lives on their own. It is a reference back to Genesis 3, when God's perfect creation fell from grace. And this bitterness is one we're very familiar with in the New Testament. There is no one who is righteous. No, not one. So let's look at verse 28. My soul continually searches for, but did not find what I was looking for. Among 1,000 people I have found one true man, but among all these I have not found one true woman. Now it sounds a bit rough to us, but is he really saying that women are worse than men? No. First, let me go back to what I just mentioned about Hebrew wisdom literature. Foolishness and sexual sin are personified as a woman. And if you recall, when Solomon was writing the book of Proverbs, he was recording it, first of all, for his sons. He rightly warns them of the seductive woman who looks to take advantage of them and bring them low. And if Solomon were writing for his daughters, he would have to tell his daughters to look out for the wicked and seductive man. Second, the imagery of the woman is a larger picture of any temptation to abandon the pursuit of wisdom and righteousness, to find a shortcut to some desire, whatever that is, power, wealth, recognition, pleasure. When the two treasures of wisdom and righteousness are not higher priorities, our own passions will draw us in, promising us freedom and yet becoming a prison. That's exactly what the teacher describes here at the end of chapter 7. Third, in Proverbs, the one named wisdom is also a woman. Lady Wisdom is the one we're supposed to listen to because she calls us to follow her for our own benefit and protection. Lady Wisdom stands in contrast to any other woman whose desires will destroy. And so, I don't know if you feel good about this, but the female gender has the distinction of being portrayed as both good and evil. In Proverbs, finding wisdom is equivalent to finding the right woman, while going with the wrong woman is indicative of folly. Look, the teacher says, I've discovered this by adding one thing to another to find out the explanation, which my soul continually searches for but does not find. Among 1,000 people I found one true man, but among all these I have not found a true woman. So finally, the term for man here is the generic term for mankind, rather than drawing our focus specifically to the masculine gender. The writer, as you see him saying, he's been adding all of these things up, trying to calculate it, discovering what he has about people on the earth, but he can't balance the ledger book that he has in front of him. And so here he's using a word picture to tell us what he found. A righteous person is impossible to find. It doesn't matter if you look for one among either men or women. And verse 29 confirms the universality of the problem that affects all of us. Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they sought out many devices. So in addition to the fact that we are limited, so we cannot fully comprehend God's ways, humans are more interested in their own ways, in their own schemes when push comes to shove. We call that the sin nature. And in doing so, we fail to pursue righteousness and wisdom. Now, in what we've read, we're reminded that we are able to discover some things, but not everything. We're limited in our comprehension of how God uses adversity and prosperity in our lives, and so we scratch our heads. We're limited in our comprehension of when and why righteousness and wickedness play out the way they do. And rejecting the reality of the limits of our understanding, leading us to a desire that would alter the world to conform with my own desires, is the path of fools. There is something behind the belief that if I can only find the right formula, the magic bullet, then things will work out for me. But that's a rejection of what we've been learning. God is sovereign. We are limited. Those who do not acknowledge either of these truths, those who do not fear God, are led astray to pursue foolishness. They will presume to know the whole when they only have one part they can understand. And then they'll take that part, this is just human nature, some pattern that they've witnessed in the world, some scripture verse they found, some wise saying, and a principle perhaps, and then they're going to try to forge that into a magic bullet. And you've heard these. Read this book, memorize this phrase, pray this prayer, give to this cause, and God or the world will be obligated as your personal genie. And then they call God or the cosmos out when things don't work the way they predicted they should, when the formula for success doesn't pan out. Now, we don't think of it this way, but this approach to life means that we're creating a fantasy world of our own design. We're convincing ourselves that we control our destiny. But wisdom is not a key that can be used in independence of the Creator to unlock the secrets of the universe, to shape existence after mortal desires, and to control life. Those who believe they can manipulate God or the world are not living in reality. But believers know that the Lord allows both good and bad things to come from being prosperous. Believers know that He allows both good and bad things to come out of poverty and suffering. The righteous may succeed, which is what we expect, or they may be falsely accused and suffer injustice. The wicked may face death, as we expect, or they may live a long life without earthly consequence. On one level, we're sort of all part of the same sorry lot, believer and unbeliever alike. We live in a world where generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning its course. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Okay, then why bother pursuing wisdom if it's not a magic bullet either? Because even though the experiences of all humanity are remarkably similar, those who exercise wisdom have an advantage. Pursuing wisdom is better because they help us to escape even more wickedness and foolishness. Perhaps it would be helpful to catalog what we've read today, to clarify some of what is better compared to the alternatives. Well, here's what we observed in Ecclesiastes 7. The fool's world is very small, and he functions out of that small view. He lives for the immediate. The wise works off of a bigger picture and lives for his legacy. The fool values the moment, ignoring death, while the wise values the moment in light of death. The fool denies reality. Death is distant, life can be manipulated, but the wise accepts reality. This is life as it is, along with his limitations to change certain things and not change others. The fool ignores correction. The wise listens to correction. The fool lives in dreams. The wise lives soberly. The fool is easily angered and proud. The wise is patient and humble. The fool lives for the good old days. The wise doesn't dwell in the past. The fool is not accepting of criticism, but very willing to give it. The fool is gracious when criticized and avoids the criticism of others. The fool sees no value in wisdom. The wise recognizes wisdom has great value. The fool believes he's in control of the world. The wise knows that God is in control. The fool, in summary, lives a life out of balance. The wise lives in balance. The wise person knows that God made us upright, but we choose our own schemes, and that's not God's fault. Now, approaching this life soberly, thoughtfully, is not a recommendation to live a joyless and oppressive or depressive life. Some people see it that way. It is not a gloomy existence. It is confronting reality head on. Life is short. There is nothing you can do to change that. We will not get to do all the things that we would like to do in our homes, in our work, in our friendships, in the family, in the neighborhood, even in our church. But that doesn't stop us from doing what we can and accepting what we can't. Now, I mentioned last time that the Christian life is continually one of balance. We are told, particularly in the New Testament, that the path to Christ-like living is extremely narrow. So we're always supposed to be deliberate, watching carefully each step so that we do not veer to the left or to the right. In this context, walking on the narrow path and pursuing wisdom would mean holding complex truths together in the center. We live with some mystery in our faith. I can know some things clearly because God has revealed them very clearly in His Word. Beyond that, I cannot be sure of many things. That's holding it all together in the middle. So walking soberly is holding complex truths together rather than giving in to the temptation to resolve things simplistically at the extremes and margins. This is exactly what the world does. Every solution to some political problem comes with magic bullet today, never thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. God is still ruling, and I'm still loved by Him when prosperity or adversity are mine, when the righteous are treated as evil and the wicked are rewarded for what they do. So let me offer some application of all of this. First of all, take a breath and wait. How many issues, encounters in life, something that hits you by surprise, are actually emergencies that have to be solved with a silver bullet right now before the werewolf walks through the door? The fool is the one who gets quickly upset when things go sideways because his plans or expectations have not been met. The wise is the one who may initially react that way. Again, we're not all together yet, but quickly remembers the larger picture of life and faith. The wise will stop to consider, will this be bothering me 100 years from now? Will this be bothering me this time next week? In other words, don't decide based on the emotion of the moment or the report of someone else's trouble. I got to go fix that. Take a breath and wait. Next, please return to the source of wisdom, God's Word. Pull out a concordance and look up the subject or issue that you're facing at that moment. What does God say about it? And what you should do about it. Is it a priority for God the way it is for you? If you can't find it in the concordance, maybe you shouldn't be worried about it. Accurately assess what is happening. If you cannot see clearly because things are too fresh or too raw, then seek the wisdom of another believer to help you gain that perspective back. Remember and accept your capacities and limitations. Remember, God is overseeing this situation that you encounter. And always pray, asking the Lord for wisdom. When it comes to applying wisdom, we come back to the same lesson that God is in control. What can wisdom really achieve? What is it really for? The biblical answer is that wisdom can never achieve for human beings the kind of control over life and destiny that they aspire to. At all times, it is God who rules the universe. Father, thank you that that's true. It's true again last Sunday. It's true again today. It's going to be true again next Sunday. And even if some of us don't come back to this church again because of death or something else, it's still true. Father, thank you that Frank helped us remember that when we were praying first thing this morning, and I pray that that would be continually part of our thinking going forward, especially when the surprise hits us this afternoon and tomorrow morning. Give us the capacity to rest in you and find our hope in you, to find our purpose in you, so that we can have clarity concerning the things that come our way, adversity, prosperity, watching the wicked succeed and the righteous suffer. Protect our hearts and minds to stay true to you, to your word, and to pursuing the one who is wiser than any other, which is your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.